Okay, so our next speakers for today or this afternoon are Susan Voight and Pat Hawley. So Susan Voight is the Access Management Coordinator for Wisconsin DOT, and she's been working in access management since 1998, and she's been at Wisconsin DOT for 33 years. Pat Hawley is with, do you say raSmith?
raSmith, correct.
raSmith, okay. And Pat has 25 years of transportation project management experience. His expertise includes traffic planning, access management, site circulation, traffic impact studies, roundabouts, and parking studies. He's conducted dozens of reasonable access studies for Wisconsin DOT and the Wisconsin Department of Justice. That means that he provides expert witness testimony on access, traffic operations, and safety issues for public and private sector clients. So with that, Pat and Susan. Maybe Susan comes up.
Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody starts thinking of their questions while we're talking, because we want questions when we're done. We have a conversation. I wanted to give some acknowledgement to Stacy Pierce and Eric Apria for putting this data together for us. They're the reason we have all the information we have. We're going to talk about the Bluemound Road project. I'm going to let Pat do a lot of talking. I'm going to do a lot of this. So you come up here and take this. Is there a pointer in there for you?
Perfect. Yes, there is. Okay. Kind of mentioned this yesterday. What's not in Sue's bio is kind of her encyclopedic knowledge of anything access related, particularly related to Southeast Wisconsin. If there's a driveway on a state highway, Sue can give you the history of that driveway, the multiple permits that were issued legally or illegally, and typically the names of the people that issued them on both the private side and internally. Watch out, Kevin. The project that we're talking about today is the Bluemound Road corridor, a suburb of Milwaukee. And the reason why it's really important is it's kind of a watershed project for the DOT in terms of median modifications. There'd been some median projects and things like that, but this corridor as a whole just was famous, particularly in the Southeast, but around the state. I don't know how many times going forward with a traffic study, traffic impact study, I don't want this to turn into a Bluemound Road. It was known for safety issues, it was known for operational issues. So as we look here, it's a 3-mile long corridor from Moreland Road on the far east to Barker Road on the west. A couple of different highlights. It's a 6-lane arterial plus an auxiliary lane, so pretty wide typical section throughout. It parallels I-94 just to this. I-94 is just to the south, so if there's any issues on the freeway, Bluemound gets all that much more traffic. It's intense retail and office land use. You've got a regional mall that's right down here. This area right here has about 1 million square feet of office, and the entire corridor just has a lot of office, multiple business parks all up and down there. For the most part, as business go in and out, they don't stay vacant very long. It has always been kind of a high demand location. As I mentioned before, kind of allowed statewide for both safety and operational issues. 10 traffic signals along the 3-mile stretch. A lot of it had overall, and this was at the time of the project, 2008-ish. A lot of it very good signal spacing. You can kind of see down the far west end, not ideal spacing. And then a couple in this location on the east end as well, where the spacing a little bit tighter and intended impact operations. Mid-30s to low 40 vehicles per day, and that was stayed consistent before and after the project. And it's fairly important because the project occurred in 2008, kind of right before the recession. Volumes along the stretch of roadway, again, a high commercial location, stayed relatively constant, which is important when we looked at the crash rate aspect. Posted speed of 45 miles per hour. My office is along here. So in the morning when I'm going to work relatively early, it's not as much traffic because the retail is pretty quiet. Traffic is going along at 50, 55 miles an hour. In the evening, when traffic rise back up, then it drops considerably more. During the peak hours, you're going maybe 35, 40 miles an hour, somewhere in there. Sewer historian has a number of photos along the corridor. So this was circa 1962. I believe it was the first 4-lane divided roadway in the state.
In the 1920s, Bluemound Road was divided and paved. It was the main corridor that went from Milwaukee to the Blue Mounds. It was supposed to go to the Mississippi, but didn't make it. But it went to Madison. And because it went to Madison, that meant that we had senators that would drive from Madison to Milwaukee. And so it was one of the first paved roads that we got. We know where that money came from.
It's even in these older pictures, the access, existing driveway, they're noted. There's a lot of different photos where the access locations were noted. And while much of the corridor has changed and evolved, some of it stays exactly the same, kind of a local tavern there. Now, one of the things I was amazed at, though, is looking at the car pictures and pulling up the license plates. Both that car right there and this one here are registered to Mike Roach.
I just want you to know I didn't actually take that picture.
Preparation for the project, DOT applied for hazard elimination safety funding, the precursor to HISAP. It was originally done to look at some of the signal modifications along the corridor. It was then expanded to include the median modifications, which really became kind of more of the element that we're going to talk more about today. So to look at kind of the objectives of this project as a whole, to improve the corridor safety through those median modifications, enhance and improve the intersection safety through some, I'd say, relatively minor modifications. This definitely wasn't a wholesale reconstruction of the corridor resurfacing. It was just kind of looking at median openings and a few minor intersection changes, which we'll go through. And then kind of secondary was how are this modifications going to enhance the overall operations of the corridor itself? So when we look at the corridor, the existing crash rate kind of prior to the project, so mid-2000s, corridor crash rate 230% higher than the statewide average for urban arterials. 2 of the signalized intersections were deemed the most dangerous intersection in Wisconsin by State Farm Insurance.
They actually nicknamed this corridor Blood Alley. They had that in the newspaper in the early 70s.
Wow. Yeah. So the corridor itself had high volumes, and then a lot of the cross streets were very high volume locations as well. So one of the things I didn't point out when we had that original map is on the far east end, Moreland Road and far west end Barker Road both have interchanges with I-94. So kind of feeding into the corridor at those locations. So some of the issues that were along the corridor, this 3-mile stretch, we had 17 unrestricted or full access median openings. Basically anyone's able to come in and out, making left turns. And as Christine mentioned, very similar to what you'd find on a 6-lane, high-speed, high-volume facility during the peak hours, there weren't a lot of people that were making those lefts out from the businesses. A lot of people were redirecting. Yes?
Is it access control road?
It actually is. This is a state Wisconsin 8425 controlled access highway. And I think we did this one in about 1951. This is one of our first.
At the intersection, the signalized intersections, the right turn lanes had a very flat angle. So it's kind of, this one shows going into an auxiliary lane. Most of them were kind of yield conditions going into a through travel lane. So it's such a flat angle, so a lot of rear end crashes where the motorists having to look back far over their shoulder, start to go, stop, someone behind them rear ends into them. So that was another deficiency that was identified. Traffic signal spacing, mentioned that before. This is on the far west end of the project. Barker Road right here, 500-foot spacing between the intersection. Now to kind of further amplify the problem of this location, kind of goes, as you're heading from east to west, you're climbing up a hill, not a real steep grade, but enough of a grade, and visually, those signals were one right behind the other. So there's confusion as to which signal you're seeing with them that close together. There was also a number of decision points that were going on immediately west of Barker Road. You can kind of just see the gore area here where Bluemound split off from Moreland. So basically the splitting of two arterials. Just a little bit further to the west is an on-ramp for I-94 to go westbound. So you had some crazy lane utilizations westbound coming into Barker Road in this original signal at, is that a public street or is that just Marcus? Marcus Drive. So it was not uncommon for traffic to back up, you know, several hundred feet, quarter mile east of Barker Road. So some of the other challenges that the project had is Wisconsin at the time was one of 2 states that didn't allow U-turns at signalized intersections. All of our neighboring states did. So if you were in Illinois and you crossed the border and most of them weren't signed, so you'd come up, you'd make a U-turn. If you were unlucky enough to do that in front of your friendly police officer, you would pull you over and you might be able to talk your way out of it. But it obviously created an issue from a continuity standpoint, from a consistency standpoint. But from an access management standpoint, if you're not able to make U-turns at signalized intersection, it really kind of challenges some of your opportunities to make median modifications. And then there's kind of the typical local business acceptance of the median modifications and the closing of those and how you're going to go through that. Involved extensive public interaction. And then the political will to implement. This is one of those projects that had been looked at and evaluated for my entire, so easily 20 years before this was implemented in terms of, okay, how can we do this? Can we close these median openings? What can be done here? All sorts of analysis, crash studies, operational analysis. Everything showed that it would work better, it would be safer. But getting over that hurdle to actually implement it was very challenging. The actual project implementation and what was done, taking those 17 unrestricted full access median openings and converting them all to directional left-ins. So along the corridor, we either had a signalized intersection, right-in, right-out driveways, or right-in, right-out left-in driveways. There are no longer any full access driveways along the entire 3-mile stretch. The right turn lanes were flat or sharpened up, so coming in at more of a close to a 90-degree angle. Number of signal modifications were done. Along with those right turns, most of the intersections were yield condition, converted to signalize for the right turn movements. And this is critical from the safety standpoint also, is the left turn movements were a mix of protected and permitted. So you could either turn on the green arrow or the green ball, and some were protected only. The entire corridor was converted to protected only. So the only way you could turn left at a signalized intersection was going to be on a green arrow. This made sense independent of the access changes that we were doing. You had a high-speed, 6-lane facility with a tremendous amount of traffic and a history of angle crashes at the signalized intersections already. But now, eliminating those median openings and putting more traffic at those intersections made even more sense. We also were able to address the tight intersection spacing on the far west end, increase that down from 500 feet to 1,000 feet, so doubled it. It's still one of those locations, though, when you drive through it, it's like, wow, that is still really tight spacing. And it improved it dramatically, but it's, again, because of the lane utilization issues for the decisions passed here, traffic still regularly backs up, you know, well before that other signal. It's definitely better, but there's still issues that hopefully can be addressed long-term with some interchange modifications later on. So the safety assessment, the project was completed in 2008. So the before data, 2005 to 2007, after data, 2009 to 2011. As I mentioned before, the traffic volume stayed relatively consistent or actually increased along the corridor during this time period. So we looked at the overall crashes along the corridor, starting with mid-block. Showed a 73% reduction in the crashes between the signalized intersections. Makes sense we would see a significant reduction in those crashes when you eliminate the left-south. I think that the magnitude of a 73% reduction was perhaps a little bit greater than we expected, but still not unexpected, perhaps. At the intersections, the signalized intersections themselves saw a 21% reduction in the overall crashes. And again, so that the new U-turn law went into effect January 2010. So it was U-turns were allowed at signals for 2 of the 3 years of the crash data. So even with that additional U-turn traffic and just more traffic going through those intersections, able to see a 21% reduction. And then overall for the entire corridor, 35% reduction. A little differently from the injury and fatality crashes, almost a 40% reduction along the corridor. And similarly with the corridor crash rate, 38% reduction. Some of the other positive outcomes, the feedback that we received was generally favorable. As mentioned, my office is along there, and just being a transportation professional in the area, people always comment on Bluemound Road to you. So it's like saying this or that. You always get feedback, particularly when they know you work along there. And the vast majority of people that we heard as the motoring public were generally in favor of it. Being kind of the Dorical transportation person, you walk into a local business and often would ask them, how are things going with it? And again, overall, you get a favorable response in terms of, well, it's a little different. You got to change how people are kind of coming in and out, but sure seems to flow a lot smoother. The corridor continues to be a major draw for development and redevelopment. Just in the last number of years, the mall continues to add outlots. It's going through a major redevelopment on the southern end. The city, Brookfield, is investing in a kind of a mini convention center. There's a new, we call it a regional mall, but a large-scale retail development on the west end, and throughout the corridor continues to be a very high-value location. And probably the biggest thing is the success of Bluemound Road project, along with the U-turn law changes, really was kind of a defining moment in terms of being able to implement projects like this and the median modifications restrictions at other state highways. Before that, modifying a median or doing restrictions for lefts in was, you do it occasionally, but not that common. Now, it's fairly common for us to be implementing that on a lot of different corridors. Any TIA that comes through, that's kind of one of the standard elements in terms of that's on the table right off the bat in terms of access configurations that they'll be looking at. And with that, we'll open up for questions. Yep.
Were there any access modifications, reductions, given this is an 8425, did you eliminate any access points?
As in, did we take any driveways?
Yeah.
No, they were really pretty good shape. We tried to do a lot of consolidating, and the kind of thing we struggled with the most was cross-access. And we didn't get as much as we wanted. We had a pretty good plan for it, but the businesses weren't interested. Now they would like us to come back and add them.
And there's kind of two different elements. So this project was done in 2008. There was a resurfacing project that occurred. In the 2008 project, the scope was fairly limited in terms of the medians and the signal stuff. The resurfacing project that occurred 11, 12, 13?
Completed in 12.
Completed in 12, but there's this corridor and then the two adjacent segments of Bluemound Road, so much kind of longer corridor. Additional driveways were closed as part of that. But as Sue mentioned, for this segment in here, the driveways themselves, it wasn't that bad.
So I was just wondering how of that was related to the modifications to the median and how much the changes in the driveways?
Yeah, so no driveways as part of this study.
I have kind of a more general question, in all the studies that we've looked at today or discussed, has there been any kind of data that supports that the property value may increase with any kind of these improvements? I think that would be a good selling point.
Yeah, we didn't do it as part of this, but there is several of the other studies that were done have that in there where it has gone back. Christina, if you want to talk more specifically on it.
Well, I don't remember the specifics of the studies, but yes, there were some that were showing property value increases and also the receipts. So for the
Thank you. Yeah, so the property values remain stable or increase. I think that was in the Texas study, right? TTI did. And is that correct, John? So you recall that? And then also Bridgeport Way, which was a access management project that involved going in and putting in a median, sidewalks, and a crossing, pedestrian crossing, and then they tried to create some network and created a little center for businesses as opposed to a strip. That's a case study that actually, it started with context-sensitive solutions, but that one, they found an increase in sales tax receipts among the businesses, I think 6% or something, from before and after studies. So, and that was a really dramatic decline in crashes, and there were pedestrian fatalities in the before situation because it was a twiddle that went to a median. And a beautiful now corridor. And as a result of the first leg, which is another public involvement strategy, by the way, they got that successful project on the ground, and then it just became a really popular thing, and it was much easier for them to extend the project further down. And we've seen this in other areas too. In Arkansas, we did a median project in Conway. Virgil Stover and I provided some technical support to Arkansas DOT during that one. And after the project, the mayor cut the ribbon on it, and then everybody wanted a median in the area. So the medians really can enhance an area, and they help the pedestrians get across. So there's a lot of benefits. But yes.
So in one addition to that, North Carolina has looked at super streets heavily. So if you came to my presentation yesterday and you saw North Carolina littered with super streets, I mean, you're just basically looking at leftovers being put together at a main intersection with a U-turn on the other side. And what we've seen at those sites is we can actually reduce the amount of right-of-way or keep the same amount of right-of-way, reduce the number of lanes, push the same amount of traffic, and even look at a partial or a complete street concept. And so you can add things like bike lanes, you can add things like aesthetics such as landscaping in the medians, and really change the way a corridor looks. You know, I push really hard because I go up and down Capitol Boulevard every day in Raleigh. It's a hot mess. There's driveways everywhere and 8-lane wide section. That road could really look very, very differently. You just can't get people's head wrapped around, you know, taking away a lane in each direction and it's still functioning the same or better, and then putting a bike lane in with transit stops and trees in the median. They just cannot even see that, how that's possible. So visualization is very important to help them see how it works, and then convincing them, you know, that it'll work the same operationally. Obviously, that's going to change property values.
Yeah, it was a timing issue with us after this project. The economy wasn't doing very well, and we didn't really feel like that was a great time to try and look at the values. So we were hoping we would get a better idea as time went on with that. But I'd like to know that as well.
Yeah, what's the value of curb, like, in dollars? Right?
Corners and corridors?
Yeah, that's, as Pat was saying, we've had some, you know, great new development out there, so it's certainly still growing, and obviously it's a good market still. It hadn't deteriorated in any way.
Other questions?